everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am so excited to be talking to you about all the books that I want to read in October. Not only does that mean that it is Victober, which is quickly becoming one of my favorite times of the year, but it is also time for the Autumn Mixtape Readathon, which is hosted by Jean of Jean's Bookish Thoughts and Leanne, and a number of other wonderful hosts as well. Am I crazy to be trying to participate in 2 readathons in one of my busiest months? Let's find out. I have tried to keep my must-read books to a minimum because October is going to be so busy. I think I've made it pretty doable. Let's see. So first of all, October is a very busy month. I go back to the opera for the first time in October. It's generally goal-setting season for teachers in my district, which is hellishly stressful. And my cousin is getting married towards the end of the month, and I am in that wedding. So that may affect my reading just a little bit. Let's first start with the Victober prompts. Victober is being hosted by some wonderful people this year. Katie of Books and Things, Kate Howe, Marissa of Blatantly Bookish, Roz of Scallydandling About the Books, and Petra of Petra U. Now luckily a lot of these prompts intersect for me this year, so excuse me as I refer to those prompts on my laptop. First of all, this year's group read is The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy, which I would love to reread as it's actually a manageable size Hardy novel. The book doesn't actually take up all of the space. This edition has a lot of critical notes and essays in the back because it's the copy I read at university. My senior seminar for my English literature major was on Thomas Hardy. So this was, I think, the 3rd of the 5 books that we read from him. So I'm really excited to reread it and possibly rewatch the adaptation with Kieran Hines, because we watched that after we read it as well, but I'd love to do both. This is a wonderful novel, but I don't feel like I can tell you a lot about it because something so huge and surprising happens within the first chapter that affects the entire rest of the novel, but I feel like telling you that would rob you of some of the surprise of it. But I implore you to read it. It is really, really well done. I then have another book that I think will work for 3 of the other challenges, and that is Nickleby by Charles Dickens. I found an audiobook version of this on Audible that is actually done as a podcast. So it's done in hour to 2 hour long chunks, which I feel like might help me fly through it a little bit faster. And it's read by Cobna Holdbrook Smith, who I've seen do a little bit of stage work, and he has a really nice voice. Nickleby is your classic Dickens tale about a young man whose father dies quite suddenly and leaves them not nearly as financially stable as they thought they were. So he and his mother and his sister have to rely on the help of their uncle, Ralph, his father's brother, who does not have their best interests at heart. Ralph Nickleby, I think, was very much a prototype for Ebenezer Scrooge. He doesn't really care about anyone else but himself and his own financial well-being. And thus, both Nicholas and his sister Kate go through a huge series of challenges of trying out a variety of jobs, and for Kate, various marriage prospects to try and keep their family afloat. It's really very deep and very dark, but it's got such wonderful moments of lightness and hope as well. This, I think, could work for several prompts. The first, I think it could work as a kind of Bildungsroman. Not in terms of we see Nicholas going from childhood to adulthood the way we do with, say, David Copperfield, but in terms of watching him mature from a fairly naive teenager who thinks he knows how the world works and thinks he can be the man of the family, to coming to terms with how dark and how bleak the world can be and trying to set that to rights in his own way. So really, you're watching someone come into emotional and intellectual maturity rather than an age kind of maturity. It also works for featuring a representation of disability or chronic illness. Early on in his journeys, Nicholas takes a job at a school which is horrendously run, think very much along Oliver lines. And a lot of the boys are sent there because they are disabled in some way. But Nicholas becomes very good friends with a boy called Smike, who is deeply disabled. I don't know if it's ever actually described in the book what exactly his disability is like. But I have seen, and I have recently gotten hold of, a film of a stage adaptation that was done by the Royal Shakespeare Company in the late 80s, I want to say, starring Roger Rees, among other actors. And in that production, they play Smike as, I don't want to say having cerebral palsy because I don't know that that's very correct, but he's certainly physically disabled. He's very much bent over. He has difficulty moving his limbs sometimes, and that he is naturally quite intelligent, but that he has speech aphasia, which is the difficulty of actually getting the words out of his mouth. I think I'm remembering that from linguistics class correctly. And the actor was not himself disabled, which I know is a gray area, but especially in the 80s, that was not a common thing to have done. But I think the actor played him very honestly and very well, and with a great deal of compassion. So there's our representation of disability, and there's our book-to-screen adaptation. So I hope to watch that as I've read chunks of the novel. It is a long adaptation. I think it takes about 9 hours to run all the way through. I don't know how actors physically did it on stage. I don't know if it ran all day, if you had to come back to the theater over several nights, but it is incredible. And it's something that my mother remembers watching on PBS in the 80s when it was airing, and that she absolutely adored. And so I hope to watch it together with her. Next, for Roz's challenge of reading some Victorian poetry, I have to admit I'm not a huge poetry person. I had hoped to read The Angel in the Home, which I know from watching a documentary about Victorian makeup was a huge influence in creating the cult of domesticity, which affected standards for women's behavior and for the way they were expected to look as well. But then I found out that it's not just a single poem, that it takes up several volumes. And given my time constraints, that just wasn't going to happen this year. But then I remembered, we are reading Hardy, I also have his complete poems from that same university course. So I will read at least one of these poems over the course of October. I haven't decided which one yet, but I'll have a flip through and see which one appeals to me in the moment. And lastly, for Marissa's challenge of reading a short story, I happen to have a collection of short stories by Robert Louis Stevenson. I have read Dr. Jekyll and Hyde in university, but this is full of other short stories that I haven't necessarily heard of. Plus, this edition is beautiful. Fun fact, it was actually a Christmas gift to my father last year, but he wasn't really interested, so I said, well, I'll take it. Yes, it also has the stories Will o' the Mill, Markheim, Thrawn Janet, Olalla, The Bottle Imp, The Isle of Voices, The Waif Woman, and The Body Snatcher. I have not heard of any of those, so if you all have, or especially if you have read one, let me know down below which of those you would recommend. Now for the fall Mixtapeathon, they do have a bingo board. But in order to fill that bingo board, you don't have to fill the whole card. You just need to get 3 in a row. Half of them are self-care prompts. I'm sure I will be reading in a cozy spot, so that is easy. So the 2 reading prompts on either side were to read either a witchy book or a book with a strong female protagonist. And for that, I have chosen Before the Devil Breaks You by Libba Bray. This, unfortunately, is not Victorian at all. I don't know that I would call it witchy, but it is definitely supernatural and features several wonderful female characters, along with some wonderful male characters. This is book 3 in the Diviners series, which focuses on a group of teenagers in New York City in the 1920s who are always called upon to fight off various supernatural threats to sometimes New York City, other times the world, mainly centering around Evie, who is a diviner. So if she holds an object belonging to someone, she can feel and occasionally see whatever was going on with them. I forget if it's in the moment or the last time they held it, something along those lines. Evie is definitely strong in terms of being headstrong. She knows what she wants and she's not afraid to go for it. That sometimes gets her into a lot of trouble. Other times, it really helps her save the world. Yes, this is really quite big, but it's also a young adult novel, so it does read quite quickly. So hopefully I will manage to get through this as well. And then the last prompt is to read book with nature on the cover. Now for this I have 2 potential choices. I could read The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex, as we have the ocean and some beautiful stars up here. And this takes place in Cornwall, I believe, and it surrounds the mystery of a group of lamplighters who went missing several decades before, if not hundreds of years before. And so the current denizens, the current lighthouse keepers, are trying to figure out what went wrong with the last set. So vaguely spooky, also good for October, lovely beachy British setting. Or I could try and do 2 things at once and read The Making of a Marchioness by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This is a bind-up of The Makings of a Marchioness and its sequel. And as you can see, we have this lady here in this beautiful garden, so there's our nature. But The Makings of a Marchioness was published in 1901, which is the cutoff year for the Victorian era. Besides which, if it was published then, it would have been written earlier than that, so it would have been written firmly within the Victorian era. So I could potentially count this as a Victorian read as well. This, I believe, is very much what it sounds like. It's the story of a young woman who presumably becomes a marchioness over the course of the novel. It sounds very much like a Jane Austen courtship type of novel, except that we then get a sequel following her in the aftermath of that marriage, and we get to see how it works out for her. Having read A Little Princess and The Secret Garden, I am really intrigued to see what Frances Hodgson Burnett's work for adults is like. I hope I like it as much as I think I will. So those are my choices for October this year. I would love to read as much Victorian literature as I can, and I may indeed end up reading 1 or 2 others if I have the time and the inclination. I would love to continue with Anthony Trollope and read Framley Parsonage. I might end up reading either The Irish RM or East Lynne, because those I have on Kindle, and I could read them on my phone while I'm on the train to the city or away on the wedding weekend. We shall see. These are the books that I absolutely have to read. If I have the time, which I hope I do, I hope I will read more, and I'll be able to tell you all about those books at the end of the month. Please let me know what you are planning to read, or if you would recommend any of these titles, especially if you have recommendations about those Robert Louis Stevenson short stories. And I can't wait to see how Victober and the Mixtapeathon turn out for us all. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye, everyone.